Yeah. So Alan, today in our whale call, we were talking about this idea of innovation, and one of the examples we used was the airplane and the FAA. And we asked the question,
Right.
which came first, the airplane or the FAA? So
Mhm.
it's an interesting concept, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think it's something that we see over and over again in any industry, in any kind of technology. It's usually a technology will come out, people will find an application for it, and then once it's got enough groundswell, then that's when the government typically comes in and does some regulation. So I think it makes perfect sense.
Right.
I don't think
It
anybody thinks our government is an innovator. I don't
I
think
think I
that's
agree
ever
with you
been
there.
something someone said. So
Yeah, what most of the market, it seems like, is looking for, and we can use the analogy of airplanes. I mean, that wasn't mainstream air travel.
yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't until a regulatory body stepped in and said, these are the rules. This is how we're going to make sure we all stay safe. Here is a standard to follow for the industry. And of
Mhm.
course, that led to a much larger adoption of this new innovation, which was air travel.
Right.
Yep.
I think
And
too, I think also it's like there were a lot of plane crashes happening, right? The government is typically responding to a safety issue of some sort, right? And so like that is what led to, regulation in airplanes, regulation in trains, like it over and over and over again, people are using it. It's not as safe as it could be. Accidents are happening. And then the government comes in and says, this is the safety standard. And if we all obey this standard, then this industry and technology can grow. Right. And I think it's the exact same thing. I mean, there's not a lot new in the world. It's the same thing happening over and over, just in different applications.
yeah, exactly. I think we're seeing that in the world of blockchain. There's
Mhm.
all sorts of coins and companies rising and crashing, and this is just reminds me of that analogy so much. We're going to continue seeing that, and
Yeah.
until the government comes in or whatever regulatory body comes in and says, these are the rules of engagement, this is how we're choosing to play, this is how we're all going to stay safe, I think we're going to continue to see it look like the Wild West.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even if you think about it, even the stock market, right? Like it was unregulated for a long time. And until it caused like major harm in the economy, the government stayed out of it. But I think once they did, and now I mean, if you look at where the stock market is now compared to back then, it's, quadrupled in size, if not more. So I think that like regulation really is the first step to mass adoption. And until like we see the regulation, we're not, I think, going to see as much mass adoption, because regulation also means safety to a lot of people. And I think that's what we have to remember. People are, I think there's a lot of people in the crypto world that are like, no regulation, we do what we want. And it's like, well, that's great, except when Anchor Protocol fails and you lose hundreds of millions of dollars and there was no oversight. So I think that, most people that aren't early adopters are looking at Anchor, are looking at Celsius, and they're saying, see, I told you it's really risky, don't ever do it. And I think until the government kind of puts that like spin on it, like, nope, we vetted it and we're watching these people and now you can actually do it, right? It's the same thing in banking. I mean, over and over and over again, we've seen this. So I think it's only a matter of time. Honestly, regulation will get us to where we want to be a lot faster. Not that I'm like saying I'm pro-government and pro-regulation, but just knowing how regulation shapes an industry, it's time that we have, that within the crypto world.
Yep. Agreed. What most people are looking for is safety. We call this safety credibility in our call
Yep.
today.
Yep.
And, just the same way that I'm not going to get on an airplane until there's regulation, until there's safety.
Yeah.
I think a lot of investors, institutional investors, individual investors are looking for more safety. And in order to have mass adoption of crypto, I think we're going to need that. So what we decided today is we're not going to be afraid of regulation. There's no reason to be afraid of it. We're going to actually be advocates and proponents for regulation so that there's clarity and as a result, more safety in the market.
I think also regulation, as it's been discussed up to now, has really just been around currency. And there's so many other applications to blockchain that may or may not be regulated. Like when we think of like the internal workings of a company, I mean, like there's not normally regulation inside how Microsoft Word works, right? It's just a technology, it's being used, it's, ubiquitous at this point. I think that there's so much more than just the currency aspect. I mean, a lot of the currency I've read about has been around stable coins and how they're actually justified as stable. And so there's, even if they're only starting with that, that's enough of a start to get us, much farther along. Because once the technology, I think, is regulated in any way, then other industries can feel safe actually using it. I think that's my opinion, of course.
Yep, agreed.